In the words of William Shakespeare, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. As You Like It? Act 2, Scene 2. But are the women players represented in quite the same way as the male players? Do they have the depth of character that Shakespeare gives his heroes, or do Shakespeare's female characters simply fall into two distinct stereotypes, the fallen Eve, the temptress, or the innocent and virginal Mary? Or are there other representations of women that emerge from within his work? The concept of equality between the sexes would have seemed very foreign to most in Shakespeare's day. Adam was created first and Eve from his body. She was created specifically to give him comfort and was to be subordinate to him, to obey him and to accept her lesser status. A dominant woman was seen as unnatural, a symptom of disorder. The medieval church had inculcated a view of women that was split between the ideal of the Virgin Mary and her fallible counterpart Eve, or her antitype, the whore of Babylon. Unfortunately, the Virgin Mary was one of a kind, so there was often a general distrust of women. Renaissance and medieval literature is often misogynistic. William Shakespeare is a rich and suggestive author in terms of alerting students to issues in women's studies and gender ideology. Although Shakespeare reflects and at times supports the English Renaissance stereotypes of women and men and their various roles and responsibilities in society, he is also a writer who questions, challenges and modifies those representations. This presentation will examine some of the different ways that William Shakespeare represents women in his works and will analyse his portrayal of some of his most famous female characters. Shakespeare began writing and performing his plays in the late 1500s, which was the same time that Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne of England. This was called the Elizabethan era. Despite having a powerful queen, it was time when women were thought to be weaker than men, not only physically, but emotionally and psychologically. He lived as a contemporary of Queen Elizabeth I, and they would have interacted with each other at court. Shakespeare's company is known to have performed for the Queen. Did such a level of interaction between the monarch and the playwright have any influence on Shakespeare's writing? Shakespeare does give female protagonists power within many of his plays. In his comedies, the female protagonists act in authoritative ways with success. Yet these plays did not address the role of women of royal birth. Despite the fact that there was concern about the sovereign's gender, in fact, this was one of the primary social considerations of Shakespeare's day. Indeed, as a popular and political writer, Shakespeare could hardly divorce himself from societal concerns. In two of his tragedies, Hamlet and Macbeth, Shakespeare implicitly suggests the danger of women's involvement in politics at the sovereign level. Through Gertrude's marriage to Hamlet's uncle, and also through Lady Macbeth's unbridled political ambition, Shakespeare dramatises real political concerns that evolved from and during the reign of Elizabeth I. In these characters, Shakespeare reflects political gender anxieties in the themes he develops. He also develops a schema of conflict and chaos erupting from such anxiety, and in the play's contextual resolutions, he fulfills the desire for a return to a state of stability through a solidification of the patriarchal system. Hamlet and Macbeth do not make an explicit political argument regarding Elizabeth's monarchy, but in these plays, Shakespeare does invoke the tensions of the day as related to female leadership. Aristocratic or high-born women are usually presented as possessions to be passed between fathers and husbands. In most cases, they are socially restricted and unable to explore the world around them without chaperones. These women were coerced and controlled by the men in their lives. Broadly speaking, female characters that are sexually aware are more likely to be lower class. Shakespeare allows them more freedom to explore their sexuality, Perhaps because of their low status, they are rendered socially harmless. However, women are never totally free in Shakespeare's plays. If not owned by husbands and fathers, many low-class characters are owned by their employers. Women in power are treated with distrust by Shakespeare. They have questionable morals. For example, Gertrude in Hamlet marries her husband's murdering brother, and Lady Macbeth coerces her husband into murder. For these women, the penalty for their scheming ways is normally death. Certain types of female characters often resurface in Shakespeare's plays, telling us a great deal about his view of women and their status at the time. The bawdy women. These characters are sexualized, cheeky, and flirtatious. They are often working-class characters such as the nurse in Romeo and Juliet, Margaret in Much Ado About Nothing, or Audrey in As You Like It. Mainly speaking in prose, as befitting their low social status, these characters often use sexual innuendo when conversing. Low-class characters like these can get away with more risque behaviour, perhaps because they have no fear of losing their social status. The tragic innocent woman. These women are often pure and chaste at the beginning of the play and tragically die once their innocence is lost. In stark contrast to his presentation of bawdy women, Shakespeare's treatment of young, innocent women is fairly brutal. Once their innocence or their chastity is taken away, they are literally killed to signify this loss. These characters are generally courtly, high-born characters such as Juliet from Romeo and Juliet, Lavinia from Titus Andronicus, or Ophelia from Hamlet. Their high social standing makes their demise seem all the more tragic. The scheming femme fatale. Lady Macbeth is the archetypal femme fatale. Her manipulation of Macbeth inevitably leads them to their deaths. She commits suicide and he is slain. In her ambition to become queen, she encourages her husband to murder. King Lear's daughters, Goneril and Regan, plot to inherit their father's fortune. Once again, their ambition leads them to their deaths. Goneril stabs herself after poisoning Regan. Although Shakespeare seems to appreciate the intelligence at work in his femme fatale characters, allowing them to manipulate the men around them, his retribution is always brutal and unforgiving. The witty but unmarriable women. Catherine from The Taming of the Shrew is a prime example of the witty but unmarriable woman. Feminists have commented that their enjoyment of this play is marred by the fact that a man literally breaks Catherine's spirit when Petruchio says, "Come on and kiss me, Kate." Should we really celebrate this as a happy ending? Similarly, in the plot to Much Ado About Nothing, Benedict ultimately conquers the feisty Beatrice by saying, "Peace, I will stop your mouth." These women are presented as clever, bold, and independent, but are well and truly put in their place by the end of the play. The married off woman. Many of Shakespeare's comedies end with an eligible woman being married off and therefore being made safe. These women are often very young and passed from their father's care to their new husbands. More often than not, these are high-born characters such as Miranda in The Tempest, who is married to Ferdinand, Helena and Hermia in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Hero in Much Ado About Nothing. Women who dress as men in Shakespeare's works. Rosalind in As You Like It and Viola in Twelfth Night both dress as men. Consequently, they are able to play a more active role in the play's narrative. As men, these characters have more freedom, highlighting the lack of societal liberty for women in Shakespeare's time. Women falsely accused of adultery. Women in Shakespeare's plays are sometimes wrongly accused of adultery and suffer greatly as a result. For example, Desdemona is killed by Othello, but supposes her infidelity, and hero falls terribly ill when she is falsely accused by Claudio. It seems that Shakespeare's women are judged by their sexuality, even when they remain faithful to their husbands and husbands-to-be. Some feminists believe that this demonstrates a male insecurity about female sexuality that was evident at the time of William Shakespeare. Let's now look more closely at some of his most famous female characters. Juliet from Romeo and Juliet is the daughter of Lord and Lady Capulet. At 13, Juliet is beautiful and of a marriageable age. Before meeting Romeo, she has thought little about love and marriage. Her parents are keen to marry her to a husband with good prospects and have the Count Paris in mind for a husband, and he has expressed his interest in Juliet. However, she soon stumbles upon her fate when she meets Romeo and falls instantly in love with him, despite him being the son of her family's greatest enemy. "My only love sprung from my only hate," she exclaims. Like many women in Shakespeare's plays, Juliet has very little freedom, but she is connected to the outside world through her closest friend, the nurse. However, Juliet is prepared to abandon the nurse entirely when she turns against Romeo. Juliet matures throughout the plot of the play and is eventually prepared to abandon her family in order to be with Romeo, with tragic consequences. Lady Macbeth is one of Shakespeare's most evil feminine creations because she exerts a great deal of influence over the events of the play and is the main instigator in the plot to kill the king. Her satanic prayer to the forces of darkness in Act 1 is chilling to modern readers, and it would have been absolutely terrifying to audiences watching the horror unfold in Shakespeare's own Globe Theatre. Most critical analyses of Lady Macbeth focus on her as a catalyst for Macbeth's first murder, that of Duncan, and the linear progression of her deteriorating mental state, culminating in her sleepwalking scene. In many respects, Lady Macbeth is a classic femme fatale. She is more ambitious and power-hungry than Macbeth, her husband, and when he tries to back out of the murder she has plotted, she calls his manhood into question. This presentation of Lady Macbeth has attracted accusations of misogyny from critics because the women in the play, Lady Macbeth and the witches, are manipulative and evil. Lady Macbeth is equally as ambitious as her husband, but is unable to take action herself, perhaps because of the social constraints of the time. She therefore cajoles her husband to act on her behalf. Masculinity is defined in the play by ambition and power, two qualities that Lady Macbeth possesses in abundance. By constructing the character in this way, Shakespeare challenges our preconceived views of masculinity and femininity. But what exactly was Shakespeare suggesting? On one hand, it was a radical idea to present a dominant female character, but on the other hand, she is presented negatively. Lady Macbeth's guilt soon overwhelms her. She has nightmares and tries to wash the blood from her hands. By the end of her life, guilt has replaced her incredible ambition in equal measure. We are led to believe that her guilt ultimately leads to her suicide. Lady Macbeth is therefore a victim of her own ambition and also possibly of her sex. As a woman, Shakespeare shows in her demise that she is not resilient enough to deal with such strong emotions, whereas Macbeth fights on to the very end, despite his misgivings. Of all the pivotal characters in Hamlet, Ophelia is the most static and one-dimensional. She has the potential to become a tragic heroine, to overcome the adversities inflicted upon her, but she instead crumbles into insanity, becoming merely tragic. It appears that Ophelia herself is not as important as her representation of the dual nature of women in the play. The extent to which Hamlet feels betrayed by Gertrude is far more apparent because of Ophelia's presence. Hamlet's feelings of rage against his mother can be directed toward Ophelia, who is, in his estimation, hiding her base nature behind a guise of impeccability, just as is Gertrude. Through Ophelia, we witness Hamlet's evolution, or de-evolution, into a man convinced that all women are whores. that the women who seem most pure are inside black with corruption and sexual desire. And if women are harlots, then they must have their procurers. Gertrude has been made a whore by Claudius, and Ophelia has been made a whore by her father. In Act 2, Polonius makes arrangements to use the alluring Ophelia to discover why Hamlet is behaving so curiously. Hamlet is not in the room, for it seems obvious from the following lines that he has overheard Polonius trying to use his daughter's charms to suit his underhanded purposes. In Hamlet's distraught mind there is no grey area. Polonius prostitutes his daughter, and Hamlet tells Polonius so to his face, labelling him a fishmonger, despite the fact that Polonius cannot decipher the meaning behind Hamlet's words. As Kay Stanton argues in her essay, Hamlet's Whores, perhaps it may be granted that what makes a woman a whore in the Hamlet's estimation is her sexual use, by not one man, but by more than one man. What seems to enrage Hamlet in the nunnery interlude is that Ophelia has put her sense of love and duty for another man above her sense of love and duty for him, just as Gertrude put her sense of love and duty for her new husband above her sense of love and duty for her old. Gertrude chose a brother over a dead Hamlet. Ophelia chooses a father over a living Hamlet. In Othello, Shakespeare addresses issues regarding the problematic status of women. Both Iago and Brabantio describe the loss of Desdemona as though she were a piece of property. Iago tells Brabantio, "You're robbed." Brabantio calls Othello a foul thief, and says that his daughter is stolen from me and corrupted. When Othello begins to suspect Desdemona, he couches his lament in the language of ownership. "We can call these delicate creatures ours, and not their appetites." Both Brabantio and Othello share anxieties about the loss of control and authority caused by unrestrained female desire. Ironically, Iago is able to convince Othello that Desdemona's defiance of her father and secret courtship with Othello argues a deceitful nature that will finally be turned against Othello. Desdemona herself is anxious to present herself as a vessel, sealed and pure, for the use of Othello only. "If to preserve this vessel for my lord from any hated foul unlawful touch be not to be a strumpet, I am none." However, it is clear that Brabantio, despite his high social status and power, has no real ability nor even the wish to compel Desdemona away from her marriage. She successfully argues that she has a divided duty, even pointing out that her mother once upon a time preferred Brabantio to her own father. Despite her ability to argue for the marriage of her choice, Desdemona is still seen as owing allegiance to either father or husband. But Shakespeare seems to argue that women's ethical judgment should override absolute wifely obedience. Upon discovering Iago's villainy, Emilia repudiates him, saying, "'Tis proper I obey him, but not now." Her judgment of Iago as a murderous villain and a liar, and of Othello as cruel and unworthy of Desdemona, are shared by the audience at the end of the play. Emilia also argues that wives are justified in being unfaithful if the price is right, or if their husbands misbehave. Nonetheless, even in Emilia's judgment, women are condemned for sexual license. She calls Bianca a strumpet, although we have learned that Bianca may need to sell herself for bread and clothes. And Bianca argues that she is of life as honest as Emilia. While the idea of female sexual freedom is debated in Othello, the final scenes reassert Desdemona's chastity and innocence, and her worth rests more on these than on her autonomy or sexual rights and freedom. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia's fate is determined by her father's love test. She is unable to choose her own suitor, but is forced to marry whoever passes her father's test. Portia has wealth, but has no control over her own destiny. When Bassanio passes the test, she immediately agrees to divest all her riches, property and power over to him in order to be his loving and dutiful wife. She is passed from one man's control, her father's, to another, her husband's. One wonders what is in it for her, other than companionship and hopefully love. As an audience, we know the lengths to which Bassanio has gone to win her hand, so this gives us hope that Portia will be happy with him. We later discover Portia's true grit, resourcefulness, intelligence and wit through her dealings with Shylock in court, and many a modern audience might lament her fate at having to go back to court and be the dutiful wife she promised to be. It is also a pity that her father did not see her true potential in this way, and in doing so he may not have determined his love test necessary, but trusted his daughter to make the right choice on her own. Portia ensures that Bassanio is made aware of her alter ego. In disguise as the judge, she makes him give her the ring that she has given him. In doing so, she can prove that it was her, posing as the judge, and that it was she who was able to save his friend's life, and to an extent, Bassanio's life and reputation. Her position of power and substance in that relationship is therefore established. This sets a precedent for their life together and allows the audience some comfort in thinking that she will maintain some power in that relationship. Portia is a heroine of the piece when all the men in the play have failed, financially, by the law, and by their own vengeful behaviour. She comes in and saves everyone in the play from themselves. However, she is only able to do this by dressing up as a man. As Portia's journey demonstrates, Shakespeare recognises the intellect and abilities that women have, but concedes that they can only be demonstrated when on a level playing field with men. Many of Shakespeare's women show their wit and cunning when they are disguised as men. As a woman, Portia is submissive and obedient. As the judge and as a man, she demonstrates her intelligence and her brilliance. She is the same person, but is empowered by dressing as a man, and by doing so, she hopefully gains the respect and equal footing that she deserves in the relationship. Shakespeare's representation of women and the ways in which his female roles are interpreted and enacted have become topics of scholarly interest. Shakespeare's heroines encompass a wide range of characterizations and types. Within the gallery of female characters, his female characters display great intelligence, vitality, and a strong sense of personal independence. These qualities have led some critics to consider Shakespeare to be a champion of womankind and an innovator who departed sharply from flat, stereotyped characterizations of women common to his contemporaries and earlier dramatists. Contrastingly, other commentators note that even Shakespeare's most favourably portrayed women possess characteristics that are tempered by negative qualities. They suggest that this indicates that Shakespeare was not free of misogynistic tendencies that were deeply seated in the culture of his country and his era.